Welcome to the Intellectual Adventure Podcast today. We're here joined by Jeff and AquaticCactus, and I'm excited to introduce today's subject. Should we remove bad habits as soon as they're addressed with direct force or with the mental focus and control? Kind of reevaluating, taking a step back, narrowing your view to try to attack that certain subject, which is better. And we're going to start with myself. I believe directing yourself in the situation to advise emotional stability and clarity in those situations is of the utmost importance. That's personally like something that's helped me. Having mental fortitude and balance is really important when it comes to hard subjects. And if you're coming at things with force and a direct narrative, you're maybe missing details that you would miss or that you would see if you had more time dedicated to listening, to giving equal merit in those situations. A good example would be a grocery store. You can't find an item and you automatically think, oh, they don't have it. Whereas the case might be the item got moved. Now, that's a very simple analogy, but it's a good example to highlight, how simple the details could be. But that changes the whole narrative of the situation from something not existing to something exists in a different frame. I believe that's kind of how a habit is. You never really like you can get rid of a habit, I'd say, and minimize it, but you you never really you kind of replace it. Um, at least that's the way I always think about it personally. Is you have to do something else with that. Your mind is literally trained to work in that certain direction. So giving it a similar direction but a healthier frame, maybe maybe that's good. That would be interesting to see your guys' thoughts on that because I again, when we talk about the human brain, that's out of my expertise. When it comes to the hard details, as most people, it's a lot to know. We still don't even know. Quite literally, may never. So I don't know. It's hard to say with Neuralink and everything developing.
Yeah, you definitely pose an interesting question, and you give me something to ponder about over the next couple of minutes, trying to formulate a proper response to that.
Yeah, that's okay. Is there anything you wanted to add, Jeff? Um, 'Cause I do have another little section if you want a minute.
Well, regarding habits and bad habits, um, I think we form habits as a way to make each day a little easier. You know, if you do the same thing in the same place over and over and over again, um, you can know what to expect as each day goes by. Whereas, you know, if your routine isn't habitual in some way, then you're kind of putting all the pieces together from scratch every day.
It could be innocent in origin, is kind of what you're saying. Like it doesn't have to be
Right.
malicious.
Right. And then one of the bad habits you pick up along the way could be in between two good habits. You know, it just happened to be like passing the liquor store on the way to, you know, after you drop the kids off at the school and you're headed home to be alone, you know, you just happen to pass the liquor store and you pick up that bad habit, you know, something like that. As an example, I'm not saying that drinking is bad habit or
No, no,
uh,
totally. And that's a good thing to highlight. I
it's
think it's very different for each individual.
right. I mean, alcohol has helped humanity survive some hard times. The only fresh water you had was after you boiled it to make beer with, or something like that. So it could become a bad habit, and it could be, life changing at the same time. It depends on, I guess when it comes to habits, the best thing is to find, you have to look within yourself, see what your habits are, and then you have to label them good habits or bad habits. Society will do that in certain instances, but in your own lifestyle, you could be doing things that are, not illegal or harmful around you, and they could still be bad habits. I'll
Very
have to
good
think
way of
of an
framing it.
example.
No, I think you painted it well with just that little excerpt.
I mean, one of your habits could be picking your nose in public, and you don't, you have to recognize that in yourself to say, look, it's probably not a good look, and I should probably work on changing that. And then every time you go to do that habit, you have to consciously remind yourself, this is something that I wanted to change. As that bad habit comes back around, you have to look at it again and again and again and again every time until that habit is no longer a habit. I guess that's
Yeah.
the simplest way I could put it.
Yeah, self-awareness. Honestly, it's something I've noticed it's lacking, and people's emotional states get in the way a lot of the time. The self-awareness. I've certainly struggled with it, but it's really hard to have perspective on yourself. Um, you look back on difficult discussions and challenging moments or bad habits, and it's very difficult to identify them in yourself, until someone tells you and says, hey, I noticed this, and it kind of puts it thinking in your head. You go, okay, um, maybe I do interrupt people a lot, or maybe I do chew with my mouth open, or whatever that bad habit might be, perspective wise. It's very difficult because you can see everything around you, but it's hard to have a constant mirror on yourself and dissect what you're doing while also feeling good about what you're doing, right?
It's kind of a conundrum where you are within looking out, knowing you have to stand without to look within. So it's a conundrum. It's not a natural thing to
It's
stand
taking off your
outside yourself
training
and look
wheels.
in. It is.
Yeah, that's a very interesting perspective on it. I like that a lot. And
By
good
us
rebuttal.
sitting inside and looking outward all the time, that's all we have is to look outward. It takes a lot of self-awareness to put yourself outside and to look back inside yourself. I think that's about the simplest way that I can put it. It's not normal. It's not, you know, it's a mental challenge. It really is.
I was going to say that there's certainly times where you have to jump through mental hula hoops, where you have to lean into the uncomfortable and challenge preconceived notions about yourself, or pre-built habits.
Yeah. The only thing I was going to add to that is it is almost in a sense unnatural, like you're saying, and I think that's completely valid to say, because if you're naturally inclined, you've naturally formed your mind to work a certain way, and you peel away from that, it's going to affect you mentally, of course. If you're exercising that working, when then you know that muscle, you're of course you're gonna be spent. You're gonna put more energy into that. It's gonna take more work than maybe repeating that habit, but the effort, it takes to control your path, I think it doesn't matter the effort, you know, it matters the result. And having control of yourself and having balance within yourself, I feel like that's a positive result people can get behind. Uh, I'd rather be in control of my habits and let my habits control me. I have habits like, anyone else. Nicotine's definitely been one. Um, I have a very, very big love hate with it. But,
Hmm.
I see other things and I can't fault myself for being human with it, for having moments where I feel I need to look to something to gain perspective. Like with substance, it's definitely one of those things where it gets addictive fast. It doesn't really matter necessarily what it is. It could be soda, it could be gum. Um, there's all
Food.
sorts of sugary things, especially that tend to attract a lot of consumers. And
Like cookies.
yeah, 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 like cookies, Jeff. But having control over your urges, I think is part of why I pointed towards the mental fortitude first. You know, the balance first, because you have to see that it's a problem to begin with before you can start fixing it. And
That's right.
if you really feel like you have a problem with any substance or any habit, you need to understand the root of it. So that's kind of my second part. It leads me directly into it is direct force. If it's a toxic thing happening to you, it seems worth it. It seems a little bit more approachable that way if you know that it's directly affecting your health.
Kind of like a family and an intervention.
Yeah, yeah,
That's what I'm getting from, using force as opposed to, self-awareness and self-control.
yeah.
At,
If
at
you
some
feel
point,
like,
others around you figure that you don't have the self-control, and then they hold the intervention for you as they're trying to save you from yourself, basically.
yeah, if you have a situation that really calls calls for that direct involvement. The point I was getting at was if I'd say if you have someone who's directly involved, you need to make a base, a foundation where at least you know that there's boundaries. You know, you obviously have a problem that's affecting your life. So if you don't establish a line to draw, then you might push yourself out of bounds, so to speak, too far. So that's really like my point, um in saying the brute force or more force, for something that's, I would say, extreme. Most situations it's always better to kind of ease yourself into a change. um at least if you externally add different aspects that are going on, like your patience level, your anxiety level, um, maybe anger attitude's a problem for you. The number of things that we've all struggled with. But if you don't set the standards for yourself a little higher, you won't give yourself the potential to grow into that standard, into something at least. Maybe you're not going to reach that exact thing you see, but you'll see improvements to get you a little closer each day towards that goal. And that's something worth living for. I definitely think so. I love improvement.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We we use the term stuck in their ways, but I don't think anyone wants to be stuck in their ways. I think people become victims of circumstance, and you get stuck in recurring cycles where it's hard to see a dopamine, a serotonin return, and you just don't feel happy in what you're doing. So you feel as though you're stuck in that cycle where it's hard to break out and say, these are my bad habits, these are the things I need to work on. Or even deeper still, is you when you're being hypercritical of yourself, it's finding the line of when are you being too critical, and when are you just harping on yourself and saying, I need to correct this habit, I need to correct this habit. But in reality, you're overanalyzing all of your personality or all of your habits, and just assuming that a lot of them are false, or are sorry, are you're assuming a lot of your habits are negative based on the interactions you've had. And it could be the case that your interactions were bad. So I think a level of perspective, is like outside perspective, is important as well, um, to help create a bit of levity between the two.
Yeah, that's good input. There's definitely always at least two sides to the story, you know.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. There's no when dealing with moral conundrums and human habits and the betterment of humanity and things like that, you're dealing with very large concepts. I don't think there is a black and white. I think it's a lot of gray area, and the difficulty comes from navigating that gray area. And it's a task best done with companionship, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this project is a perfect example. We're coming together to share information on how to possibly better our own habits. I know speech is one of those things. Constantly narc myself for. I don't formulate things as quick as I would hope. Some days you just want your brain to work, and it's not cooperating. Especially with speech. We think about speech being something you have to learn. It's not necessarily natural. When you really think about that, like, your mind is going through a race when you're formulating your thoughts into something that's tangible, that makes sense, that's definable. That's a lot of things. That's a computer. Like, you're calculating when you speak. And uh, the sheer fact of the matter is, I work better when I'm positive than negative. And the more positive efforts I put forth, the more positive my standard of living goes up for myself. Because I'm not looking for those external products or um, entities to necessarily produce a good vibe for me. I definitely have habits like food. Food is one of those habits where I'll put my effort into it thinking I'm gonna feel better, and then maybe I felt good. You smell that food, and you get that. For me, I get excited. I love food. Who
Pizza.
doesn't want to eat a good meal? Yeah, pizza's actually been my weakness lately. Ironically, so
I love pizza.
you called me out right there. Um, but
I felt your vibe.
you can
The pizza was calling.
you can
Yeah, I
see
felt the
Ah,
vibe.
the box is hiding.
Oh, look at
Yeah.
it's right there.
it was literally hiding the whole
Within
time.
arm's reach. That's the best way to have your pizza.
Back
Yeah,
in
that's right.
my decrepit box. but see, that's my thing, is we do a lot of things out of emotion. Do I feel morally bad that I bought a pizza? Maybe I feel like I cheated, my fitness for the week, but
You
I
should
at
feel
the same
morally
time
bankrupt. How dare you?
No.
at the same time
It has all 4 food groups in it, so don't feel bad at all. You got dairy,
right.
you got vegetables, you got meat, you got
Yeah.
bread. It's all there in one slice.
Let's just take a time to appreciate that cheese is normally a constipative ingredient, but if you have lactose intolerant, it is the exact opposite effect.
Spoken from experience, it sounds like.
Oh, never. No.
No.
Oh my gosh. Before you guys fully derail my point with saying the food and linking into that is being it's comfortable. That's I think you have to define, in order to redefine your habits, you have to define whether you want to be comfortable or whether you want to be accepted. And you live with yourself ultimately, right? So if you are okay with yourself in the state that you're in, um if you need to change and other people want you to change but you don't want to change, that's a perfect recipe for disaster. Like, you're not going to really get far. So
Sounds like
you
somebody's
have
getting
to.
new friends at that point.
Oh yeah, exactly. So
Yeah, very much.
um but at, you have to take into account what you want and ultimately take action. It's not gonna it's it's gonna be an uncomfortable process. I think habits are naturally uncomfortable because it's physically uncomfortable to go against the grain. If we look at meat, a piece of meat, just like a piece of wood, really, you can see the grains, you can see those fibers. I mean, within us, we have the same thing. We're made of muscle and flesh. So there's aspects in that I feel the brain's very similar. Of course, we know it's a muscle. So you're going against that grain. It's going to be rough, naturally going to be abrasive. And if you expect that and expect the bite, maybe you're able to brace.
Or you're numb to it. You listen to people say, you should eat less, or you should drink less, or you should smoke less for so long that you're just numb to it and you just blow it off.
Yeah. Some people are jaded.
They're comfortable where they're at, smoking and drinking and eating.
Yeah.
It's a pleasant experience, and then it fills up their dopamine receptors, and then they just forget that, unfortunately, we are a creature of balance, and the term homeostasis applies to our mental state, our physical state as well, and you can just load up on a dopamine receptor all you want, but if you're not balancing out your serotonin, your oxytocin, and everything else, your body falls out of whack very, very quickly. So comfort is sometimes a scary place.
Double-edged sword, as they say.
Yeah, very much so.
Oh yeah, as a prime procrastinator, I definitely know the procrastination scurry. We've all done it.
Procrastination is a comfortable place.
Exactly. It's as simple as one little thing that a spoon that spools into another situation. Um, and I definitely think that shortcuts with your mental health are never really good in the long run. You really should fortify and establish a foundation where you can understand what you're doing and why it's worth doing these things for yourself, why it's worth valuing yourself, why it's worth motivating yourself, because those things are contagious, and ultimately you're going to help people the best by staying in the game, by being a team leader. Maybe you're not the leading type, but you lead by your actions. Be a good follower. There's nothing
It's
wrong with being a
actually
follower.
there's actually a really good adage, and it's that a lot of the best leaders are not the people who sought out leadership, but instead are the ones who had leadership thrust upon them and were forced to make the best of the situation. They often found that people that were thrust into positions of leadership by situations of force or necessity were more resilient, were more creative, were better at problem solving because they didn't have the luxury of failure. Failure wasn't really an option, or because they sought out the qualities of leadership that they identified with, someone that they knew would be a good leader for themselves. So they chose to be that person when the leadership role was thrust upon them.
I honestly feel like I'm in that situation now. Not to be selfish here, but I've been doing this podcast. I've been doing the World Networking podcast. I've been running Discord server stuff, which in my mind, Discord's whatever. Like, it's not that hard to deal with. The part that's frustrating about it is not the structure; it's the people. It's the social aspect. It's always a social aspect. You can
Always.
find that on any social media. So Discord's not unique. But
The
my
lethargy.
problem, my problem is my work. I feel very much burdened with that. Like, without getting into details, I have a job where I'm training to do operations, and I have to do quite a few tasks that I've never done in my life. And I have a real fake it till you make it personality with this job. Um,
You're forming new habits.
it's uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable every day at work. It's quite honestly the truth, because I never know what I'm getting into. But it's good for me because I'm learning to thrive in that uncomfortability, or that discomfort. I'm learning to
Mhm.
enable myself in that discomfort. Okay, having discomfort, where how can I improve this situation? It's just simple. Like, I've been listening to podcasts more. It was a habit I fell out of. So I've been using this time learning about pirate history. I've been learning about all sorts of history, things that I can take, values that I can take, and improve my efforts in my off time in these projects. So I've been able to use that uncomfortable situation really to find improvements in myself. I know I'm improving. I I have a lot to learn. As do many people, There's always something new to discover, but these kinds of projects where you throw yourself into an environment that you're not used to really open your eyes up to how emotional you can be. There's some topics we've talked about that I feel uncomfortable with because it's out of my control. I don't know anything about that. I mean, what am I going to say? I'm expected to have a response. Been a couple topics I struggled with really taking it to the next level to really connect the dots, but I like that. I love that feeling, because that means that we're not thinking about surface level stuff. We're trying to take it to the next level. We're already looking at improving ourselves. Whether or not we thought of it that way, that's proof that there's a level of development going on there. And that part excites me about doing projects that feel uncomfortable. That's probably why I've always been attracted to the business world. Um, as much as I said I wouldn't be, like, it it really comes down to what runs the base of society. The base of society is founded by its leaders. It really, you have to connect yourself with those social leaders, even if that's in the industry, because they got there somehow. they got their connection somehow. And to some level, those business owners succeeded. To the extent their success goes is opinion, but to have an open business essentially is succeeding in establishing said business. So, it's all about perspective. It really can go, if you judge everyone based on Amazon, you're going to find a lot of disappointment. Most people can't operate at that extent. Big shock.
I hear Jeff Bezos is selling a lot of stock lately. I'm wondering if there's something coming.
Oh,
I think honestly, it just might just be the end of quick commerce. Maybe we may just be saying an end of an era where Amazon is probably losing money in a lot of the ventures that they've been dumping money into for the past few years. I don't pay a lot of attention in their what acquisitions they do, but my assumption is that he's either trying to liquidate it for charity purposes, or he'll just sell it and invest in whatever billionaires invest in now, space.
Yeah, he does have a space program going, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think
it's
most of the
competing with
billionaires
Tesla.
do.
Or sorry, Elon's.
Right. No, it's just funny you mentioned Amazon. They had visions for drone delivery to the customer within a half an hour after you order and stuff like that. And those are fantastic ideas, but they weren't able to produce anything that was able to markedly make them more money. So I don't think there's so much on the forefront of that anymore. And Habits as a corporation is a whole nother story compared to what we're talking about with ourselves. It's one of those, a corporation has to create habits, and at that point you're forcing your employees to take on those habits. So that goes back to the first question. It's, at that point, force becomes mandatory. These are what you have to do, and you have to change your habits to include these throughout the day. And when you go home, then you can do what you want. So
Sure. Yeah,
I think that, a lot of people's bad habits within themselves possibly start with habits that corporate put on people to get their job done. It's as an extension, they find an escape because they hate their job or something like that. So they stop at that liquor store they used to pass every day on the way home and pick up a bottle. It's I don't know. At that point, that person needs to really stand outside and look within. But they're in some of the darkest places, and it's probably the hardest time in their lives to do that. So they're feeling a lot of pain. They're feeling a lot of, hate and regret, and I should have done this or that. And so they crawl inside of a place instead of stepping outside of that place and looking within. They crawl within.
Yeah.
It's about the best way I can put it.
Yeah, I see that in a lot of people, especially people I've worked with in retail. Just for an example, because it's a field I've worked. I know there's a lot of situations this is probably applicable, but people that feel like they're going to be at night shift their whole life, kind of people, or that they don't see themselves moving up. They just see themselves continuing at the rate they're continuing, and that's the channel that they've selected to put their effort into, because they truly believe that's their reality. The reality is they can expand upon that. They don't have to wait to be told to do something. And change takes effort.
It does.
You're never gonna be completely satisfied with everything you do in a day, because you most likely can't do everything that you'd like to do in a day. If it's there's only so much time, and being strategic about your day and about how your form is throughout your day is important. Strategy helps produce efficiency at the end of the day. If you can improve your strategy, you can be more effective at what you do.
Mm-hmm.
People think strategy is like all about command and conquer and puzzles, and yeah, it's a part of it, but strategy is ultimately teamwork, you know, approach, like predictability. Um, you could say communication. Communication is a very strategic thing. I've already talked about how it's unnatural to use language. Like we've had to train and educate people on how to understand what they're saying properly. And even at that, like there's still plenty of examples out there of people being illiterate, and I'm not just talking in the past, I'm talking present day, where education is unfortunately selective in certain parts of the world. I don't know what that looks like in all regions. um, how could you? There's so many of us. It's a lot of people, and that's why it's important to value individual stories, and taking all this stuff and making positives that you can take and maybe improve each of their lives through positive reinforcement. Even just doing that is makes me happy when someone makes a video that makes me laugh, or brings up a cool subject of history. Like, it definitely improves my mood. So what's to say that the random YouTuber isn't um, the anonymous hero at the same time? And that's just one example. There can be a lot of examples. Firefighters, nurses, stuff like that. Plenty of examples. Truckers. It's a really, really good one.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't think about those people.
Yeah, people that keep the glue, like they're the glue to our society, but it's
And
not
on
that
the
they're
shelves in the
unsung
stores.
heroes. They're just we don't see them. They're not in the spotlight unless catastrophe hits and they have to be thrust into the spotlight. But often they sit in the sidelines, don't get recognized for their efforts.
And demonized for the job they do, especially if they're in front of you and you're in a hurry on the roadways. And it's like farmers. Without farmers, there'd be no food, but they're looked at by most people in big cities as just dirty country people, you know, until the store shelves go empty, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, you know, the
Yeah, I was
truckers
thinking
ain't
about
bringing the food, same thing.
Yeah, I was thinking about how you mentioned alcohol earlier about how it was necessary for people to survive, especially on ships, environments where they needed something to stay decontaminated, and they um sorry, I just blanked.
Well, by boiling the water to make the beer, they sanitized the water and they didn't know it. They just knew that they would be healthier drinking the beer than they would if they just drank the water without any treatment
Yep.
whatsoever.
Yes, and the point I was trying to get to is the people needed to use alcohol for preservation in ships, and they this connotation today, the modern hillbilly type, the the trailer trash, so to speak, like, to assume that class, that caliber of people that specifically drink beer is this trope, NASCAR watching individual, like there's tons of tropes, and I'm not going to pretend like I know them all, but um the point being that this happens in so many situations where people apply labels based on either past experiences they found preference for some reason, um, You know, World War II history, perfect example. It's an awful event. Let's be honest. World War II is not something to celebrate um,
Mm-mm.
at the deepest root, but we have tons and tons of people that want to talk about the story of World War II and relive it in the way they talk and the way they live and take certain ideology from that event that we don't even know the full truths to in the present day and pretend like it's something that's cool. And that's something that's always bothered me. I love strategy games. I love war games. Um, and I do think there's an element to the strategy that's cool, but the war itself, it's awful, man. And if there's anything to it that I enjoy, it's the historical knowledge I gain to understanding what value a human life has. Every time I play war games, that I think about my men. Yeah, it's a game, but the game is take care of your men. And a lot of people that just doesn't, I truly feel like they think, oh, well, this is going to be an arcade experience. Throw it in, big boom. Well, that was cool. But for me, it's like, yeah, this is how how effective of a leader can I be? I've always loved that aspect to it because it's self improvement at the core. No different than chess, really. I mean, you don't just because a pawn goes in a straight line doesn't mean it can't be useful.
I'll be right back.
Or ferment more barley.
Oh, I think I just need straight up more potassium.
Start eating bananas.
We're not going to leave that in the podcast. I was not craving pickles like that.
Everyone's been craving pickles, let me tell you. Ew. I wouldn't use pickles for potassium, though.
Pickle juice.
Banana.
We don't have bananas.
One whole dill pickle, 20 milligrams potassium, 23 milligrams potassium. One banana,
80?
360 milligrams potassium.
Yeah, I forgot it was that high.
Bananas are crazy high in potassium.
That is actually crazy high. I'm even gonna buy some bananas before I go to work. That's what I'm gonna do.
Do it.
I'm gonna go bananas for those.
All
All
right,
right.
we're not having another podcast going bananas, all right? let's keep
Yeah.
it on track here.
Let's keep it on track. Okay, so I wanted to frame the question: what makes a habit desirable? I honestly think for me, having a habit that improves my patience. Maybe it's a long term goal. Building two long term goals. That's something that I find desirable in a habit. What about you, Jeff?
Um, I find desirable habits are the ones that help me get through each day a little easier, perhaps with a little more money in my pocket, and do not put a drag on society in general. Of course, everybody's human; they fail at everything, but as long as I can close my eyes at the end of the day and say that I have accomplished things. Also, to step outside and look within yourself, to look at yourself from without, um, could also be a good habit because that makes you aware of your habits. And kind of like that's one of those was it infinity mirrors at that point. Having a habit of looking within to see what your habits are.
Yeah. And on that note, what habits or what to me makes a habit desirable? To touch base on what Jeff said, or kind of trail on the coattails of it, A desirable habit to me is one that makes my life easier day to day, but not at the expense of the people around me constantly. Every now and then, my own personal habits and desires will be a detriment to the people around me, and that's the human existence. But a desirable habit is a habit that I can take accountability for, and it's something that I can look at myself and be proud that I do that thing day in and day out, whether it be cleanliness or motivation and motivating the people around me, whatever that thing may be. That I can look back on that habit and say, this wasn't a fruitless effort.
The experience with habits, or how would you summarize your experience with habits in one word?
Mm, one word:
Habits in one word.
awareness.
Yeah.
I'd say reflection.
Reflection.
Yeah.
Yeah. Reflection,
Mhm.
awareness.
I I know
Honestly,
this is two words, but bad vibe. You know, no one really
I,
wants to deal with it.
I was going to say sympathy
Sympathy.
is for yourself and others. And it ties back to how situational habits are and then the types of situations that bad habits can form. But yeah, sympathy.
Interesting. I like it. I think that's good. Um, it's a good place to tie it off. And with that said, honestly, thank you guys for being here.
Thank you for joining us today on an intellectual adventure.